Viagra was invented for erectile dysfunction. That is what it does. That is why it exists. Pfizer made a pill. The pill treats ED. You've seen the commercials. End of story. Except the original clinical trial had nothing to do with erections. The trial was for angina, chest pain, restricted blood flow to the heart. That is what sildenafil, the compound inside Viagra, was designed to treat. It was a cardiovascular drug. That's it. And here is where it gets strange. The trial was failing. By 1992, Pfizer's researchers were looking at the data, and the results were not good enough. Sildenafil was not treating angina the way they needed it to. The project was close to being canceled, and then the participants started reporting a side effect, and when the researchers asked them to return the unused pills at the end of the trial, the participants refused. So if Viagra started as a failed heart medication, if erectile dysfunction was never the plan and never the target, never even on the radar when the research began, what actually happened in those trials, and how does a drug go from treating chest pain to becoming the most recognizable pill on the planet? Let's go back to 1989. Pfizer has a team of researchers working on cardiovascular disease. The goal is to find a compound that relaxes blood vessels, specifically the smooth muscle in arterial walls, so that blood can flow more freely to the heart. The theory is that if you can dilate the coronary arteries, you reduce the workload on the heart and relieve angina. The compound they develop is sildenafil citrate. It works by inhibiting a specific enzyme called PDE5, phosphodiesterase type 5. PDE5 breaks down a molecule called cGMP, and cGMP is what causes smooth muscle to relax. So if you block PDE5, cGMP levels rise, smooth muscle relaxes, blood vessels dilate. That was the whole mechanism. The problem is that PDE5 is not only found in coronary arteries, it is found throughout the body. And smooth muscle is found in a lot of places you might not immediately think of. The Phase 1 trials run in Merthyr Tydfil, Wales, in 1991. The participants are male volunteers. The dose is tested. The cardiovascular results come back modest, not enough to move forward with confidence for angina. The team is disappointed. But during the follow-up, the participants are asked to report any side effects. And the side effects they report are not nausea or headaches or fatigue. They are reporting erections, sustained, unexpected erections. And when the nurse asks them to hand back any leftover tablets, multiple participants either claim they have none left or are reluctant to give them up. Now here is the part most people miss. This was not a eureka moment. This was not one researcher looking at a result and immediately saying, "We've discovered something bigger." The clinical team reported the finding up the chain, and the initial response was cautious. Erectile dysfunction in 1991 was not a commercially attractive target. It was not well characterized as a medical condition. It carried stigma. The pharmaceutical industry wasn't pursuing it because there was no real market framework for it yet. The decision to pivot from angina to erectile dysfunction was a business decision as much as a scientific one, and it took time. Further trials were designed specifically to test sildenafil's effect on ED. Those trials, Phase 2, then Phase 3, ran through the mid-1990s. By 1998, the FDA approved sildenafil under the brand name Viagra, 7 years after those participants refused to return their pills in Wales. So where did the myth come from? The myth that Viagra was simply invented for ED? Partly from Pfizer's own marketing. Once the drug was approved, the story that got told publicly was clean and simple. A drug for erectile dysfunction. The angina trials, the accidental discovery, the reluctant participants, none of that is in the advertisement. The ad shows a couple dancing. The pill is for the condition. That's the story consumers received, and partly from how we remember scientific discoveries in general. We like the version where someone set out to solve the problem they solved. The accidental version is messier. It implies that the most commercially successful drug in pharmaceutical history, Viagra, generated over $1 billion in revenue in its first year, was not planned, that the researchers were working on something else and stumbled into it. That's uncomfortable in a way the intentional version is not. But the science is clear on the mechanism. PDE5 is expressed in the corpus cavernosum, the erectile tissue of the penis. When sildenafil blocks PDE5, CGMP rises, smooth muscle relaxes, blood flow increases. That mechanism was not designed for the penis. It was designed for the coronary artery. The penis just happens to contain the same enzyme, and this matters for understanding what Viagra actually does and doesn't do, because the myth that it was invented for ED leads to a second myth that it creates arousal. It doesn't. Sildenafil does not affect libido. It does not affect desire. It does not work unless there is already sexual arousal present, because arousal is what triggers the initial release of nitric oxide that gets the CGMP cascade started. Sildenafil just keeps that cascade going longer by blocking its breakdown. If you take Viagra and sit on the couch, watching nothing in particular, nothing happens. The drug requires the physiological trigger. It extends the response. It does not initiate it. There is also the cardiovascular story that most people have completely forgotten. Sildenafil is still used today for cardiovascular conditions. Not angina, the original target, but pulmonary arterial hypertension. High blood pressure in the arteries of the lungs. It is sold under a completely different brand name, Revatio, for that indication. The same molecule, the same mechanism, different organ system, different disease. And doctors who prescribe it for pulmonary hypertension are essentially using the original research intent just applied to a different arterial bed than the one Pfizer started with. So you have a drug that was developed for the heart, failed at its original target, found an unintended application in a completely different organ system, got pivoted into a new indication for business reasons, went through 7 years of trials, became a billion-dollar product, and is now also used for the lung condition it was adjacent to all along. That is not the story in the commercial. That is not the story that got told. But that is what happened. The same molecule, 2 brand names, 3 organ systems, 1 accidental discovery. The researchers in Merthyr Tydfil were not trying to solve erectile dysfunction. They were trying to keep blood flowing to a stressed heart. The thing they accidentally proved is that the same molecular switch exists in tissues across the body, and that blocking it in one place doesn't mean you know what it'll do in another. And the participants in the 1991 trial who wouldn't give back their pills? They knew something before the researchers did. They just didn't have a word for it yet. Every dose of Viagra ever taken is technically a side effect. Pfizer set out to fix the heart. The trial failed. The project was weeks from cancellation, and the only reason it survived is because a group of men in Wales in 1991 refused to give their pills back. That is the actual origin of Viagra, not a solution, a surprise, and we built a billion-dollar industry on it. That's Wrong Wednesday.